Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the American Northwest. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the winter of 1883, 27 men ventured into the dense forests of northern Montana's Bitterroot Range. The logging and fur trade were booming businesses, drawing ambitious men to the untamed wilderness with promises of fortune. Their encampment, established near what is now known as Blackwater Creek, was meant to serve as a base for a season of trapping and hunting. Records show they were well-equipped, well-supplied, and experienced in frontier survival. The leader of the expedition, Jeremiah Hulcom, had organized similar ventures for over 15 years without incident. Yet, despite these favorable circumstances, only 9 men would ever emerge from those woods. The disappearance of 18 men represents one of the most perplexing mass vanishings in American frontier history. No bodies were ever recovered. No conclusive explanation was ever provided. The 9 survivors refused to speak of what occurred during those 3 months isolated in the wilderness. What follows is a reconstruction of events based on fragments of journals, local newspaper accounts, territorial records, and the few testimonies that emerged years later, when the survivors believed no one was listening. The official explanation, as recorded in the Montana Territorial Register, dated April 17, 1883, attributed the losses to harsh winter conditions and possible hostilities with native tribes. Yet weather records from that winter show unusually mild conditions, and the local Salish people had maintained peaceful relations with trappers for decades. Something else happened in those woods, something the survivors worked deliberately to conceal. This is the story of the Blackwater Creek hunting camp and the terrible secret that has remained buried for nearly a century. Mill Creek, Montana Territory was a modest settlement in 1882, consisting of little more than a general store, a sawmill that gave the town its name, 2 saloons, and a scattering of wooden structures that served as homes and businesses. Situated in a valley with mountains rising in every direction, it was a place where men came to seek their fortunes in lumber, furs, and occasionally gold. The settlement's population fluctuated with the seasons, swelling in spring and summer when the passes were clear, thinning as winter approached. But there were those who saw opportunity in the harsh Montana winters, when fur-bearing animals grew their thickest coats and commanded the highest prices. Jeremiah Hulcom was one such opportunist. At 53 years of age, he had spent the better part of his life in the territories. Originally from Pennsylvania, he had moved westward as a young man, working as a surveyor before establishing himself as an organizer of hunting and trapping expeditions. By 1882, his reputation in Mill Creek and surrounding settlements was well established. He was known as a meticulous planner, a strict disciplinarian, and a man who brought his teams back alive. The Mill Creek Gazette from November 1882 contains an advertisement placed by Hulcom, seeking experienced men for winter expedition, 3 months' work, equal shares of profits, previous wilderness experience required. Inquire at Wilson's General Store. According to store ledgers preserved in the Territorial Archives, 26 men were eventually selected from among the applicants. They ranged in age from 22 to 48. Most had previous experience with Hulcom or came recommended by his associates. A few were newcomers to the territory but brought valuable skills or resources to the venture. The expedition was to be a commercial enterprise, primarily focused on trapping fur-bearing animals and scouting potential logging sites for a spring cutting cruise. December 3, 1882. The expedition departed from Mill Creek, 27 men in total, riding in 8 wagons loaded with supplies to last through winter and into spring. Territorial records list their names: Jeremiah Hulcom, Augustus Reed, Samuel Perkins, Thomas Fletcher, William Norton, Benjamin Lewis, Charles Winston, Jacob Miller, Isaac Thompson, Frank Wilson, Daniel Roberts, Joseph Davis, Henry Adams, George Stewart, Edward Collins, Michael Williams, Robert Taylor, John Anderson, James Martin, David Brown, Richard Evans, Christopher Hughes, Paul Mitchell, Peter Schmidt, Frederick Cooper, Howard Griffin, and Eli Watson. 9 would return: Hulcom, Reed, Perkins, Fletcher, Norton, Lewis, Winston, Miller, and Thompson. The rest vanished without a trace. The journey to their chosen hunting grounds took 11 days. They followed established trails, crossing the Clark Fork River before turning northwest into less charted territory. The terrain grew increasingly difficult: dense forests of pine and fir, steep ridges, narrow valleys cut by swift-flowing streams. According to Hulcom's journal, they encountered no other humans after the 4th day, though they did come across abandoned trapper cabins and the occasional prospect hole where some hopeful miner had tested the ground for gold. On December 14th, they reached their destination, a relatively flat area in a valley where 3 streams converged to form what Hulcom named Blackwater Creek, due to the dark coloration of the water stained by the tannins from surrounding vegetation. The site was well chosen from a practical standpoint: ample water, natural shelter from the prevailing winds, plentiful game trails visible in the light snow cover, and enough flat ground to establish a substantial camp. They immediately set to work constructing their winter quarters. The men were divided into teams, some cutting timber, others clearing ground, still others beginning the construction of the first cabins. Hulcom's journal from December 15th notes, "Work progresses satisfactorily. All men contribute according to their abilities. Weather holds fair. First cabin nearly complete by sundown. Expect to have all men under proper shelter within the week if conditions remain favorable." By December 21st, the camp was largely complete. 7 cabins arranged in a rough circle, with a larger central structure serving as mess hall and meeting place. A rudimentary stockade of sharpened logs surrounded the perimeter, not for defense against human attackers, but to keep large predators at bay and to prevent the pack animals from wandering. Standard procedure for wilderness encampments of that era. Hulcom established routines immediately. Men were assigned to hunting parties, trapping lines, camp maintenance, and guard duty on a rotating basis. His journal from this period reveals the methodical mind that had earned him his reputation for successful expeditions. Detailed inventories of supplies, records of daily hunting yields, maps of established trap lines radiating outward from the camp, and careful notation of weather conditions. The first 5 weeks passed without significant incident. The men settled into their routines. Trap lines were checked daily. Hunting parties brought in deer, elk, and the occasional moose to supplement their provisions. Pelts began to accumulate: beaver, marten, fox, and the particularly valuable river otter that inhabited the streams. Hulcom's journal entries from this period are mundane, detailing hunting successes, weather conditions, and minor disputes among the men. On January 2, 1883, he wrote, "Norton and Schmidt engaged in heated words over a card game, separated them before matters escalated. Otherwise, spirits remain high, trapping lines yielding satisfactory results. Expect first shipment of pelts to be ready by month's end." No indication of the horror that would soon envelop the camp. The men were not completely isolated during this period. According to Hulcom's journal, a system had been established whereby accumulated pelts would be transported to the nearest trading post, a 5-day journey by horseback, where they would be exchanged for additional supplies, and any necessary communications with Mill Creek could be conducted. The first such journey was scheduled for late January, with Wilson and Evans designated as couriers. They never made that journey. January 24, 1883 marks the first anomaly in the record. Hulcom's journal entry for this date contains a curious note. Reed reports unusual findings along the northern ridge. Claims to have discovered abandoned camp. No sign of occupants. Peculiar markings on trees surrounding site. Will investigate tomorrow, if weather permits. The next day's entry is brief. Weather did not permit investigation. Reed agitated. Claims to have heard voices in the forest during night watch. Likely overtired. Have assigned him to camp duties for 3 days' rest. 3 days later, Hulcom records, Reed continues to speak of voices in the forest. Now claims they call his name. Have examined him for fever or other ailments. Appears physically sound, but mentally distressed. other men beginning to avoid his company. January 26 brings the first indication that Reed's experiences might not be isolated delusions. Stewart and Brown report unusual sounds while checking northern trap line, describe as whispering that follows but never comes close enough to understand. Both men of sound character and not given to fanciful notions, have instructed all men to travel in groups of 3 rather than pairs until situation clarified. The following day's entry is ominous. Schmidt failed to return from trap line. Cooper and Mitchell sent to search. No sign by nightfall. Will continue search at first light. January 28th. Cooper and Mitchell located Schmidt's final trap line. Traps undisturbed. No sign of Schmidt. Unusual tracks in snow, possibly bear, though pattern inconsistent with any bear sign I've encountered. Men increasingly uneasy. January 29th. Cooper missing as of morning count. Mitchell claims they separated briefly while searching for Schmidt. When he called out, Cooper did not respond. Another search party formed, no success. Camp now down 3 men. Have ordered all trapping activities to be conducted in pairs. No man leaves camp alone. By February 1st, Hulcom's writing betrays growing concern. Men report sounds from forest during night, describe as voices without words, likely wind through rock formations creating unusual acoustics. Nevertheless, have doubled night watch rotation. A pattern was emerging. Men were vanishing 1 or 2 at a time, without struggle, without alarm, often when momentarily separated from their companions. The psychological effect on the remaining men was profound. Hulcom's journal documents increasing tension, arguments, sleeplessness, and what he terms nervous disorders among the expedition members. February 30th. Mitchell located approximately 1 mile from camp, confused and disoriented, claims to have been led astray by familiar voices. Mayquail. Medical examination reveals no physical injuries, but extreme exhaustion. He speaks of the door in the cave, but becomes agitated when questioned further. Have sedated him with whiskey and laudanum. The situation deteriorated rapidly after this point. Hulcom's entries become sporadic and increasingly disturbed in tone. From February 5th, Mitchell found dead this morning, no apparent cause, body cold, features frozen in expression of extreme terror. Men insist on burial outside camp perimeter despite frozen ground. 4 hours to dig adequate grave. Roberts led prayer service, morale at lowest point. That same day, Watson, Hughes, and Taylor failed to return from hunting expedition. Griffin and Anderson volunteered for search party, reluctantly approved despite growing darkness. Neither they nor the hunting party returned by midnight. Camp now down 8 men. Remaining men insist on gathering in Central Hall rather than dispersing to individual cabins. Have agreed to this arrangement for sake of morale. A significant gap exists in the journal between February 5th and February 18. When entries resume, they are radically altered in character and content. Hulcom's normally precise handwriting appears shaky, hurried. He no longer records dates consistently, sometimes marking entries only as day or night. One undated entry simply reads, "They watch from between the trees. They are not what they appear to be." Another, "7 more gone. They went for water. The creek is only 200 yards from camp. We heard no struggle, no cries for help. They simply vanished between one moment and the next. Those remaining refused to speak of it, as if silence might protect us." The final entry, presumed to be from late February, "We leave at first light, the 9 of us who remain. We burn everything we cannot carry. We tell ourselves we will reach Mill Creek in 10 days if we maintain steady pace. We tell ourselves we will be safe in daylight. We tell ourselves many things." What exactly transpired during those missing 2 weeks in February? The journal provides no answers. Later testimonies from the survivors are contradictory and often incoherent. The only other contemporary document from this period is a fragment of what appears to be a personal diary, presumed to belong to Benjamin Lewis, recovered among his effects when the survivors returned to Mill Creek. The fragment contains just 3 entries, undated. The singing comes from beyond the ridge now. Mitchell says it's coming from the cave, but there is no cave. Mitchell is not well. None of us are well. Reed says they're coming closer, says they wear our missing friends' faces like masks, says he can see what's behind the masks when they blink. He won't tell us what he sees. Hulcom ordered us not to speak of it, says speaking gives it power. But silence hasn't protected us either. We are 19 now. Tomorrow there will be fewer. The 9 survivors emerged from the forest on March 12, 1883, according to the Mill Creek Gazette. They arrived separately, not as a group. First came Reed and Miller, stumbling into town shortly after dawn. Winston and Thompson arrived at midday. The others straggled in before nightfall, with Hulcom being the last, arriving as darkness fell. Their physical condition was poor, but not critical. They showed signs of exposure, malnutrition, and exhaustion consistent with a difficult winter journey. But they bore no serious injuries, no frostbite, no wounds that might explain the loss of their companions. Their psychological state, however, was profoundly disturbed. The Mill Creek Gazette of March 14, 1883, reports, "The men appear greatly altered from when they departed some 3 months past. They start at sudden sounds. They avoid direct gaze. They speak little, and when pressed for details of their expedition, provide accounts so varied as to suggest deliberate obfuscation or mental confusion resulting from their ordeal." Their accounts of what happened varied so dramatically that authorities quickly became suspicious. Reed claimed they had been separated during a blizzard. Miller insisted there had been no blizzard, but rather an attack by an unidentified mountain tribe. Winston and Thompson refused to speak at all. The others provided contradictory versions of events, each inconsistent with known facts and with each other's testimonies. What they agreed upon was that 18 men had perished. How, why, and where remained contested. No coherent explanation emerged. The territorial governor, concerned about possible foul play, dispatched Sheriff James Blackwood, notably the Oss, grandfather of Theodore Blackwood, who would later investigate the incident to interview the survivors and determine whether criminal charges were warranted. Sheriff Blackwood's report, preserved in territorial records, concludes, "While inconsistencies in their accounts raise suspicions, there is no physical evidence of wrongdoing. The men appear traumatized rather than guilty. I recommend medical attention rather than legal action." Doctors who examined the survivors noted unusual symptoms. Dr. Martin Whitaker's medical report states, "Subjects exhibit extreme aversion to darkness, insist on lamps remaining lit throughout night, react with disproportionate terror to certain sounds, particularly wind in trees or distant animal calls. Several report identical nightmare of being called into forest by familiar voices. Recommend continued observation." The territorial governor dispatched a recovery expedition on March 20th, guided by Lewis and Fletcher. According to the official report filed upon their return, they were unable to locate the hunting camp. Both guides appeared disoriented in terrain they should have known well. After 10 days of fruitless searching, the expedition returned empty-handed. This failure fueled speculation. The Mill Creek Gazette of April 2nd asks, "Were our guides deliberately misleading the recovery team? If so, what horrors are they attempting to conceal? If not, what phenomenon could so disorient men who had successfully navigated the same terrain just weeks earlier?" A second, larger expedition in June 1883 finally located the remains of the camp. They found the burned remnants of cabins consistent with Hulcom's journal entry about burning everything before departure. They found no human remains, no personal effects, no evidence of violence or struggle. The official report notes, "Site appears to have been abandoned in haste, but without disorder. No indication of attack or natural disaster. The fate of the missing men remains undetermined. This expedition made another discovery not mentioned in the official report, but recorded in the private journal of Alexander Reynolds, the team's cartographer. Reynolds writes, "Located unusual cave formation approximately 1 mile north of campsite. Entrance partially concealed by fallen timber. Interior walls covered with markings unlike any I have encountered. Not Indian pictographs, not minor symbols, not natural formations. Geometric patterns that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. Expedition leader ordered cave sealed with dynamite after 2 team members reported hearing voices calling from its depths. Detonation successful. Entrance completely collapsed." The 9 survivors scattered after providing their testimonies. Records indicate most left Montana Territory entirely. Augustus Reed relocated to Oregon. Samuel Perkins moved to California. The others similarly dispersed across the country, maintaining no contact with each other according to available records. Jeremiah Hulcom remained in Mill Creek briefly before departing for Seattle in late 1883. His journal, which he had carried out of the forest, was donated to the Territorial Archives under the condition it remained sealed for 75 years after his death. It was finally opened in 1960, Hulcom having passed away in 1885, reportedly by his own hand. The mystery might have ended there, relegated to local folklore, had it not been for Theodore Blackwood, a graduate student at the University of Washington, who encountered Hulcom's journal while researching frontier settlements for his doctoral thesis in 1962. Blackwood became obsessed with the Blackwater Creek incident. His research notes, preserved in university archives, document a methodical investigation spanning nearly a year. He tracked down county records, newspaper archives, church registries, and personal correspondence related to the survivors and their descendants. Most significantly, he conducted interviews with the still-living relatives of the 9 men who had emerged from the forest in 1883. These interviews revealed disturbing patterns. Martha Reed, granddaughter of Augustus Reed, reported that her grandfather never slept in darkness and maintained loaded rifles at every door and window until his death in 1884, just a year after his return. William Perkins, grandson of Samuel Perkins, recounted family stories of his grandfather's episodes, periods where he would insist that friends long dead were watching him from the corner of the room, wearing faces that didn't fit right. Blackwood's research also revealed that of the 9 survivors, 7 died within 2 years of their return, most by suicide or under questionable circumstances. Augustus Reed shot himself in October 1884. Samuel Perkins drowned in the Sacramento River in January 1885, though witnesses reported he was a strong swimmer. Thomas Fletcher was found hanging in his barn in March 1884, with what the coroner described as an expression of extraordinary terror on his face. Only Jacob Miller and Isaac Thompson lived to old age, both becoming recluses in their later years. Miller died of natural causes in 1927 at the age of 76. Thompson outlived them all, passing away in 1931 at 82. In Thompson's personal papers discovered after his death by his son Edward Thompson, Blackwood found a sealed envelope marked, "To be burned unread upon my death." Edward Thompson had retained the envelope but honored his father's wish not to read its contents. He provided it unopened to Blackwood, who persuaded him that the historical value of its contents justified breaking this promise. Inside was a detailed account of what Thompson claimed had occurred at Blackwater Creek. The document, dated January 3, 1930, begins, "I am the last living witness to what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883. As death approaches, I find the need to record the truth, though I have spent my life concealing it. Let this account serve as both confession and warning." According to Thompson, the trouble began not with the disappearance of Schmidt, as Hulcom's journal suggests, but several days earlier. Thompson writes, "It was Reed who found the cave, Not an abandoned camp, as Hulcom recorded. A cave, its entrance half hidden by fallen timber. Inside, Reed discovered peculiar markings carved into the stone walls. Not Indian signs, not miners' markings. Something older. Something none of us recognized. Reed brought others to see his discovery. Thompson continues. 7 of us entered the cave with Reed. Hulcom refused to go, saying he had trapping lines to check. Inside, we found the markings extended deep into the mountain. Fletcher, who had some schooling, said they resembled no language he knew, but had a mathematical precision to them. Roberts noticed they seemed to change when viewed from different angles, as if shifting under our gaze. Thompson describes how they discovered a chamber deep within the cave system. The walls opened into a space larger than our mess hall. At its center stood what Roberts called a door frame with no door, a perfect rectangle of stone standing unsupported on the cave floor. Beyond it, only the far wall of the chamber was visible. Yet something about that frame made us uneasy. The air around it seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer rocks. What happened next, according to Thompson, defies rational explanation. Schmidt was closest to the frame. He reached toward it, not touching, merely pointing. Said he felt a cold draft coming through. Then he stepped forward as if to pass around the frame. Instead, he passed through it. One moment visible, the next gone. No sound, no flash of light. Simply gone, as if he'd never been. Panic ensued. The men fled the cave, returning to camp. They told Hulcom and the others what they'd witnessed. Most dismissed it as a prank or hysteria. Cooper and Mitchell, however, insisted on returning to investigate, convinced Schmidt was playing an elaborate joke. They never returned. Thompson's account grows increasingly disturbing from this point. He describes how, over the following weeks, men continued to vanish, not only from the cave, which they'd sealed shut with felled timber, but from the camp itself. They were taken in moments of solitude. A man would step behind a cabin for privacy or walk to the edge of the clearing to relieve himself and never return. No tracks leading away. No signs of struggle. More terrifying were the voices. Thompson writes, "We began to hear them after the first week. Familiar voices calling from the forest. Schmidt's voice. Cooper's voice. Each man who had vanished calling to those who remained, asking for help, begging to be let back into camp. We maintained strict discipline. No one responded. No one ventured out after dark. But each night the voices drew closer. Each night they sounded less human." Most disturbing of all was Thompson's description of what they began to see at the forest's edge. They looked like our missing companions, standing just beyond the firelight, but wrong somehow. Their proportions subtly altered, their movements too fluid or too rigid, their faces expressionless, even when calling out in apparent distress, and their eyes. When the firelight caught their eyes, they reflected back not red as an animal's might, but a deep, impenetrable black. By February, according to Thompson, the survivors had split into factions. One group, led by Winston, advocated abandoning the camp immediately. Another, under Roberts, insisted they must find and recover their missing companions. Hulcom maintained they should wait for better weather before attempting the journey back to civilization. The breaking point came when Roberts and his faction ventured into the forest one morning, armed and determined to locate the missing men. They were 15 when they left camp, Thompson writes. By nightfall, none had returned. We heard their screams throughout the afternoon, distant at first, then closer, then abruptly silenced. When darkness fell, 17 figures stood at the forest's edge. Our missing companions, Roberts among them, all standing motionless, watching the camp, all wearing the same empty expression. The 9 who ultimately survived made their escape the following morning. They left in haste, taking minimal supplies, abandoning much of their equipment. Thompson's account becomes fragmented here, describing a desperate 10-day journey through the forest. "We did not travel as a group," he writes. "That was our salvation. We scattered, each man making his own way, using the sun and stars to maintain a southeastern course toward Mill Creek. By day, the forest was merely a forest. By night, Thompson never explicitly states what pursued them by night. He only writes, "They are not gone. They are never gone. They found a way through, and now they walk among us. They look like men, but they are not men. And they are spreading. The document concludes with a cryptic warning. If you encounter a man who does not cast a shadow at noon, who does not blink in strong wind, who speaks your name as if learning how the word tastes, run. Do not look back. Do not respond when he calls after you. What wears his skin is not a man at all. Theodore Blackwood became convinced Thompson's account, while perhaps distorted by trauma and time, contained elements of truth. His research notes show increasing preoccupation with verifying specific details. He consulted geological surveys to confirm the presence of cave systems in the area. He interviewed elderly residents of the region about local folklore predating the Blackwater Creek incident. He compiled a list of unsolved disappearances in the Bitterroot Range dating back to the earliest European explorations. Most significantly, Blackwood attempted to locate descendants of the 18 men who vanished. He found none. No death certificates, no estate records, no mentions in family Bibles or church registries. It was as if they had never existed beyond their names on Hulcom's expedition roster. Blackwood's faculty advisor, Professor Lawrence Merritt, became concerned about his students' increasingly erratic behavior. In a letter to the department chair dated May 12, 1963, Merritt writes, "Blackwood has abandoned all pretense of academic objectivity. He speaks of the Blackwater incident as if it were occurring in the present rather than 80 years past. He reports unusual sounds outside his apartment at night. He has taken to carrying a sidearm, claiming it contains silver bullets. Though I suspect this is merely a bizarre joke, I recommend a leave of absence." Before any action could be taken, Blackwood departed Seattle for Montana. His last known communication was a postcard to Merritt dated June 7, 1963. "Leaving tomorrow for the Bitterroot Range. Have coordinates for the camp location. Will verify Thompson's account directly. If I do not return by July 1st, notify Sheriff's Department in Missoula." University records indicate Blackwood departed Seattle on June 8, 1963. He never returned. A search party found his abandoned campsite 3 weeks later. His research materials, including Thompson's account, were recovered intact. Blackwood himself was never located. The University of Washington's Department of History officially closed Blackwood's case in September 1963, listing him as missing presumed deceased due to wilderness accident. His research was archived, largely forgotten until 1968, when Professor Marion Leach discovered it while organizing departmental records. Leach, intrigued by Blackwood's findings, conducted her own investigation. She never ventured into the field, instead focusing on historical records and interviews with locals in the Bitterroot region. Her research uncovered a disturbing pattern. The area surrounding Blackwater Creek had been the site of multiple disappearances stretching back to the earliest European explorations. French trappers in the 1820s referred to it as La Forêt qui prend, the forest that takes. Native legends spoke of a thin place where the boundary between worlds could be crossed under certain conditions. Most significantly, Leach discovered that the 9 survivors of the 1883 incident were not the only ones to emerge from the forest that season. Between March and October 1883, 11 strangers appeared in settlements throughout Montana Territory, men with no history in the region, men who could not or would not account for their origins, men who, according to local records, exhibited peculiar behaviors and mannerisms. Leach compiled a list of these individuals from territorial records, newspaper accounts, and church registries. Among them, John Smith, likely an assumed name, who appeared in Helena in April 1883, described in police reports as speaking in a monotone and standing motionless for hours. Arrested for vagrancy, but escaped custody. No subsequent record. Thomas Green, who arrived in Butte in May 1883, established himself as a barber. Customers reported he rarely blinked and breathed only when speaking. Shop found abandoned in October 1883. No further record. William Jones, who took a position as schoolteacher in a small settlement near present-day Missoula in September 1883. School records note his unusual stillness and tendency to watch children without speaking. Disappeared after parents complained of children's nightmares. No subsequent record. The pattern was consistent. Men who appeared suddenly, exhibited unusual behaviors, integrated briefly into communities, then vanished without explanation. Leach found similar cases in neighboring territories and states in subsequent years, suggesting a gradual dispersal from the original location. Leach's research culminated in a monograph titled Echoes from Blackwater, Displacement and Identity in Frontier Catastrophe. The university declined to publish her work, citing methodological concerns. Leach resigned her position in 1969. Her subsequent whereabouts are unknown. The final document at the University of Washington's archive relating to the Blackwater Creek incident is a letter from Edward Thompson, son of survivor Isaac Thompson, to Professor Leach. Dated July 1969, it reads in part, "Your inquiry regarding my father's account has caused me considerable distress. I had hoped the document would remain unread, as he wished. Now that its contents are known, I feel compelled to share one additional detail. In his final years, my father became convinced he was being watched. He installed locks on every door and window of his home. He refused to go out after sunset. The night before his death, he called me to his bedside and said, 'They've found me at last. The ones who took Schmidt and the others, they wear their faces still, though it's been 50 years. I dismissed this as the rambling of a dying man. Now, having read your summary of his written account, I am less certain. Last week I saw a man standing across the street from my home. He remained motionless for hours, watching my house. When approached by a neighbor, he identified himself as Peter Schmidt, the name of one of the men who vanished in 1883. The neighbor thought nothing of it, but I remembered my father's stories. I am leaving town tomorrow. I advise you to abandon this line of research. The Blackwater Creek incident has largely faded from public memory. The area was incorporated into national forest land in the early 20th century. Modern maps no longer identify Blackwater Creek by name. The precise location of the hunting camp and the cave described by Thompson remain unknown. Yet occasionally reports emerge from the region that echo elements of the original incident. In 1922, a lumber surveying team of 5 men disappeared while assessing timber resources. In 1947, 3 hikers vanished from a marked trail, their equipment found neatly arranged beside the path. In 1958, a family of 4 went missing during a camping trip, their vehicle discovered with a flat tire at a Forest Service road turnout. Forest Service records from the 1940s through the 1960s document unusual animal behavior in the region. Birds falling silent in mid-song, game animals abandoning traditional territories, predators exhibiting uncharacteristic avoidance of certain areas. Rangers assigned to the district frequently requested transfers. Several reported hearing voices in the forest, particularly at dusk. These reports were systematically dismissed as the effects of isolation and difficult working conditions. In 1965, a geological survey was conducted in the region as part of a broader resource assessment. The survey team's report contains a curious footnote: anomalous acoustic properties observed in Sector G7. Sound appears to reflect in unpredictable patterns, creating impression of voices where none exist. Recommend further study by qualified acoustic specialists. No such study was ever conducted. A 1967 internal memo from the U.S. Forest Service's regional office references unauthorized excavation in the same area. Evidence of recent digging discovered by Ranger Patrol appears to be attempt to access cave system. No permits issued for archaeological or geological exploration in this sector. Recommend increased patrols. The subsequent patrol reports indicate no suspects were identified. What truly happened? to the 18 men who vanished from the Blackwater Creek hunting camp in 1883? The official explanation, harsh weather, possible conflict with native tribes, satisfies only the most cursory examination. The survivors' contradictory accounts suggest a deliberate attempt to obscure the truth. Thompson's narrative, while potentially compromised by trauma or mental instability, aligns with local legends and subsequent incidents in ways that cannot be easily dismissed. Perhaps most disturbing is the implication in Thompson's final writings that whatever the men encountered in the forest did not remain there. His claim that they are spreading suggests a threat not contained to a remote wilderness location, but one that might manifest anywhere. They look like men, but they are not men, he wrote, a warning, a delusion, or the documentation of an ongoing infiltration. One final document merits attention. In 1967, during routine maintenance of the Montana Historical Society archives, a staff member discovered a previously uncatalogued letter apparently written by Jeremiah Hulcom shortly before his death in 1885. Addressed to the territorial governor but never delivered, the letter contains a single paragraph. "I write not to confess but to warn. We brought something back with us, not in our hands or in our packs, but in our minds. A door once opened cannot be fully closed. They watch me now as I write these words. They wear familiar faces, Schmidt, Cooper, Roberts, and the others. They stand at the corners of my vision, patient and expectant. They know I will join them soon, but before I do, know this. They are not confined to the forest any longer. They walk the streets of your towns. They sit in your churches and your council meetings. They may wear the faces of those you once knew. Trust nothing. Trust no one. The door stands open, and they continue to come through." The letter was filed away, dismissed as the ravings of a man descending into madness. Yet, in light of Thompson's account and the patterns uncovered by Blackwood and Leach, it takes on a more ominous character. In 1968, a curious incident occurred in Seattle. Police records document the arrest of a man identified as Theodore Blackwood for disturbing the peace. The arresting officer's report states, "Subject was accosting pedestrians, claiming to have returned from Montana after 5 years in the forest. Subject appeared disoriented and malnourished, clothes tattered but paradoxically clean as if recently donned. When questioned about his identity, subject became agitated, insisting, 'I am not Blackwood. Blackwood is gone.' Subject remanded to Western State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. Hospital records indicate the man was released after 3 days, having been deemed no threat to himself or others." The examining physician's notes include the observation, "Patient exhibits unusual speech patterns, often pausing mid-sentence as if listening to unheard voices. Maintains fixed stare without blinking for uncomfortable durations. Claims to be Theodore Blackwood, but demonstrates no knowledge of Blackwood's academic work or personal history." The examining physician's notes include the observation, "Patient exhibits unusual speech patterns, often pausing mid-sentence as if listening to unheard voices. Maintains fixed stare without blinking for uncomfortable durations. Claims to be Theodore Blackwood but demonstrates no knowledge of Blackwood's academic work or personal history." The man disappeared after his release. University records contain no indication that anyone claiming to be Theodore Blackwood ever contacted the institution. His family, when interviewed by a journalist in 1970, stated they had received no communication from him since his disappearance in 1963. Local newspapers in Seattle occasionally reported sightings of a man matching Blackwood's description in the years following the 1968 incident. The Seattle Times ran a small article in 1971 titled "Missing Professor Spotted Downtown," describing a gaunt man in outdated clothing who identifies himself as Theodore Blackwood, seen standing motionless for hours outside the University of Washington Library. Campus security found no one matching this description when they investigated. The forest remains, Blackwater Creek, though renamed, continues to flow. The cave, if it exists, has never been officially located. 27 men entered the wilderness in December 1882. Only 9 emerged. What became of the other 18, and what might have emerged in their place, remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the American frontier. In 1972, Park Ranger David Corbin filed an unusual incident report while patrolling what is now the Lolo National Forest, an area that encompasses the presumed location of the Blackwater Creek camp. The report describes an encounter with an elderly man in outdated clothing at a remote trailhead. According to Corbin, the man identified himself as Peter Schmidt and claimed to be waiting for my companions to return from their trap lines. When Corbin pointed out that no trapping was allowed in the national forest, the man reportedly smiled and said, "The forest has its own rules." When Corbin turned to radio for assistance, the man vanished. A subsequent search found no tracks leading away from the location. Corbin's report concludes with a personal note. Subject's manner was deeply unsettling. Maintained eye contact without blinking. Spoke in monotone. Skin appeared waxy or artificial under flashlight. Request permission to avoid solo patrols in this sector. Permission was granted. Corbin transferred to Yellowstone National Park the following year. Similar reports surfaced periodically in the region. In 1985, a hunting party reported encountering men standing motionless among the trees at dusk. The hunters described them as dressed like old-time trappers and watching us without speaking. When approached, the figures reportedly retreated into the forest, moving with unusual speed and coordination. The hunters cut their trip short, claiming the encounter had spooked their horses. In 1994, a group of college students on a weekend hiking trip reported hearing voices calling from off-trail near sunset. One student separated from the group to investigate and did not return. Search and rescue operations located the missing student 2 days later, disoriented and suffering from exposure, with no memory of where he had been. According to the incident report, he repeated one phrase during his rescue: "They wear familiar faces, but they are not who they appear to be." Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery made during construction of a new fire access road in 2002. Workers uncovered what appeared to be an old cabin foundation approximately 10 miles from the nearest known historical settlement. Archaeological assessment dated the structure to the late 19th century. Among the artifacts recovered was a metal button bearing the initials PS, potentially connecting it to Peter Schmidt, one of the vanished trappers. The archaeological report notes that the cabin appeared to have been deliberately burned, with evidence suggesting the fire had been set from within. In the decades since Blackwood's disappearance, the Bitterroot Range has been fully mapped, its forests harvested and regrown, its wildlife studied extensively. Yet even today, local guides warn visitors against camping near certain unmarked streams. Forest Service employees rotate out of the district at rates higher than comparable assignments. And occasionally, hikers report curious encounters, familiar voices calling from dense undergrowth, figures glimpsed between trees that move in ways that seem almost, but not quite, human. In 2013, a documentary filmmaker named Rachel Carter began researching the Blackwater Creek incident for a potential series on unsolved historical mysteries. Her production notes, shared with colleagues, show a methodical approach: interviews with local historians, consultation of archival materials, on-location scouting in the Lolo National Forest. Her final email to her producer, dated September 18, 2013, reads, "Think I've located the actual site of the Blackwater camp. Matches Hulcom's descriptions perfectly. Planning final scout tomorrow with local guide. If it checks out, we'll start filming next week." Carter never returned from that scouting trip. Her rental car was found at a trailhead parking area, locked and undisturbed. Her camera equipment was missing. The guide she had arranged to meet claimed she never arrived for their appointment. Search operations continued for 2 weeks before being suspended due to early snowfall. When they resumed in spring 2014, no trace of Carter was found. 3 months after Carter's disappearance, A strange video was uploaded to her professional YouTube channel. The footage, shaky and partially obscured, shows a densely wooded area at dusk. A woman's voice, presumably Carter's, narrates, "Day 3 of solo search. I think I found it." These foundations match the description in Hulcom's journal. The camera pans across what appear to be stone foundations overgrown with vegetation. The narration continues, "There's something else here, some kind of structure, not on any of the maps." The footage shows a rocky outcropping with what might be an opening. The camera moves closer, revealing darkness beyond. The narrator's voice grows excited. This has to be the cave Thompson described. The entrance was supposed to have been collapsed in 1883, but here it is. I'm going to take a quick look inside. The footage becomes darker, illuminated only by the camera's built-in light. Stone walls appear, bearing faint markings consistent with Thompson's description. The narrator's voice is now hushed. "These markings, they seem to shift when I look at them from different angles, just like in the account." The camera continues deeper into the cave. The footage abruptly destabilizes, as if the camera operator had stumbled. A brief glimpse of what appears to be a stone structure is visible, rectangular, freestanding in the cave's interior. The narrator gasps. The camera drops, showing only rock floor. Audio continues for approximately 30 seconds. Footsteps, rapid breathing, a distant sound that might be voices, then silence. The video ends with 10 minutes of black screen. Audio analysis reveals faint sounds during this period, occasional footsteps, distant vocalizations that audio experts have described as not clearly identifiable as human speech. The final seconds contain a whispered phrase that has been variously interpreted by listeners. The most common interpretation, "They're wearing our faces now." YouTube removed the video within 24 hours, citing disturbing content violations. Copies exist on various internet archives. Law enforcement investigated the upload, but was unable to determine who had accessed Carter's account. Her case remains open. The 9 survivors of Blackwater Creek carried something out of the forest with them, if not physical evidence, then a secret they maintained until death. Whether that secret was merely the trauma of watching their companions succumb to wilderness hazards, or something far more sinister, may never be known with certainty. What we know is this: 27 men entered the forest. 9 walked out, and in the years that followed, strange figures appeared in settlements throughout the region. Figures who resembled men, but who, according to those who encountered them, were somehow wrong in ways difficult to articulate. In 2018, a hiker discovered a cairn-like stone arrangement in a remote area of the Lolo National Forest. Beneath the central stone was a metal container, badly corroded but still sealed. Inside was a handwritten note on deteriorated paper. The majority of the text was illegible due to water damage, but several phrases remained. Clear, found the cave again despite the collapse. They continue to come. Through where our faces but cannot perfectly mimic, but recognize them by their stillness, their fixed gaze. I do not trust even familiar faces in the forest. The note was signed T.B., potentially Theodore Blackwood, though handwriting analysis was inconclusive due to the paper's condition. The location was approximately 15 miles from where Blackwood's campsite had been discovered in 1963. The Forest Service employee who first examined the note requested transfer the following week. In his exit interview, he stated only that he no longer felt comfortable working alone in that district. When pressed for specifics, he refused to elaborate, saying, "Some things are better left unspoken." Recent years have seen increased interest in the Blackwater Creek incident among paranormal researchers and conspiracy theorists. Internet forums contain hundreds of posts speculating about what happened to the 18 missing men. Theories range from the mundane, bear attacks, tribal conflicts, infighting, to the fantastic, alien abduction, interdimensional portals, possession. Most unsettling are the claims of contemporary encounters. Since 2010, over 30 posts have appeared on various forums describing experiences in the Lolo National Forest consistent with elements of the Blackwater Creek accounts, voices calling from dense forest, Figures that move in unnatural ways, men in outdated clothing who stand motionless among the trees. While many such claims can be dismissed as hoaxes or misperceptions, their consistency with historical accounts raises disturbing possibilities. In 2021, a small team of researchers from the University of Montana's Anthropology Department conducted a limited archaeological survey in the area believed to contain the Blackwater Creek campsite. Their preliminary report notes evidence of 19th century human habitation consistent with temporary encampment. Multiple cabin foundations identified. Evidence of deliberate burning. No human remains located. Survey terminated prematurely due to team members reporting auditory hallucinations and psychological distress. The team leader, Dr. Rebecca Stern, elaborated in a subsequent interview, "Something about that location affected my team psychologically. 3 experienced field researchers, all reporting the same symptoms. Voices calling their names, peripheral visual disturbances, profound and irrational dread. I've worked archaeological sites across North America for 20 years and never experienced anything like it. We collected our samples and left. None of us would consider returning. The samples collected included soil from the cabin foundations, fragments of burned wood, rusted metal objects, and stone from a nearby cave entrance. Preliminary analysis of the cave stone revealed unusual properties, microscopic patterns that seemed to shift depending on the angle of observation, consistent with both Thompson's account and Blackwood's notes. Further study was abandoned when 2 laboratory technicians reported headaches and auditory hallucinations after prolonged exposure to the samples. All materials were subsequently sealed and placed in secured storage at the university. Dr. Stern's request for a more comprehensive investigation was denied. The official reason cited was budgetary constraints. Unofficially, colleagues reported that university administrators had received concerning information from federal agencies regarding the site. They may walk among us still. The forest keeps its secrets. The door, once opened, remains ajar. And somewhere in the dense woods of the Bitterroot Range, the echo of what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883 continues to resonate, a warning unheeded, a mystery unsolved, a horror undimmed by the passage of time. In 2022, a hiker reported a strange encounter to Forest Service personnel. While resting at a remote stream crossing, he observed a man in old-fashioned clothing standing motionless on the opposite bank. When approached, the man identified himself as Jeremiah Hulcom and claimed to be waiting for my men to return from their trapping lines. The hiker, unaware of the historical significance of the name, thought nothing of it until he mentioned the encounter to a ranger, who recognized the name immediately. A subsequent check of the area found no tracks or evidence of another person's presence. The ranger's report concludes possible case of mistaken identity or fabrication. Alternatively, witness encountered individual with knowledge of local history engaging in historical reenactment. No further action warranted. The report was filed and forgotten, but the questions remain. What if the 18 men who vanished in 1883 never truly left the forest? What if whatever took their place continues to exist, wearing borrowed faces, mimicking human behavior just accurately enough to pass casual inspection? What if Thompson's warning, "They look like men, but they are not men," was not delusion but desperate truth? The Blackwater Creek incident offers no definitive answers, only disturbing possibilities. In the absence of conclusive evidence, each of us must decide how much credence to give the accounts of traumatized survivors, obsessed researchers, and modern witnesses. Perhaps the explanation is mundane: the psychological effects of isolation, the unreliability of historical records, the human tendency to pattern match and create narrative from coincidence. Or perhaps something truly inexplicable occurred in those woods, something that continues to ripple outward through time, touching lives far removed from the original event. Perhaps the door Thompson described remains open, a passage between worlds that was never successfully closed. Listen carefully in the silence between heartbeats. Their voices might be calling your name, and if you hear them, if you feel drawn toward the dense shadows between ancient trees, Remember Thompson's final warning. If you encounter a man who does not cast a shadow at noon, who does not blink in strong wind, who speaks your name as if learning how the word tastes, run. Do not look back. Do not respond when he calls after you. What wears his skin is not a man at all. For the 27 men who entered the Montana wilderness in 1883, what began as a routine expedition ended in mystery and horror. Only 9 returned, forever changed by their experience. The other 18 vanished into history, or perhaps into something far stranger. Their true fate remains unknown, their story a disturbing footnote in the chronicles of the American frontier. The forest remains. Blackwater Creek, though renamed, continues to flow. And somewhere in the dense woods of the Bitterroot Range, something watches and waits. Something that wears familiar faces. Something that calls with familiar voices. Something that entered our world through a door that should have remained closed. 27 men entered the forest in 1883. Only 9 walked out. The others? They may be closer than you think.